The air on the 42nd floor always smelled like ambition and ozone. A sterile mix of lemon cleaner, chilled recycled air, and the faint metallic scent of fear. I'd spent 15 years learning to breathe it, to navigate the invisible currents of power that flowed through the halls of Sterling and Gray like high-voltage wires. I was the senior director of strategic partnerships. To outsiders, it sounded bureaucratic. To those who knew how money really moved in this city, it meant I held the keys. My power wasn't in shouting. It was in the silence before the signature, the subtle nod across a polished mahogany table, the $3 billion merger I'd spent the last 9 months sculpting from chaos into a masterpiece of corporate alignment. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, reviewing the final clauses on my tablet, when the door slammed open. It wasn't an entrance. It was an invasion. Harper, the newly appointed VP's daughter, clicked into the room on stilettos that sounded like gunshots. 24 years old, armed with an MBA her father had probably funded with a year's revenue, and wearing a smirk that said she believed she was the protagonist in a movie where everyone else was background noise. It was her first day, her first hour. "Excuse me." Her voice cut through the low hum of the floor like a razor. She wasn't looking at the skyline, she was looking at me. Or rather, at my blazer. I lowered the tablet slowly, turning with the practiced neutrality I reserve for volatile investors. "Can I help you, Harper? I'm Alara. We were supposed to meet at—" "I know who you are," she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. In the other, she held a thick, spiral-bound relic, the employee handbook from the 90s that no one had opened since the dawn of cloud storage. "And I know what you're doing. Reviewing the final protocols for the Steel River acquisition?" I kept my voice level. "No," she sneered, stepping closer. She smelled of over-applied jasmine perfume and raw insecurity. "You're violating Section 7B of the client-facing dress code." I blinked. I was wearing a vintage Chanel blazer, navy with mother-of-pearl buttons, tailored trousers, and a leather satchel that cost more than her monthly lease. It was the armor of a woman who closed deals. "The pearl buttons," she said, tapping the handbook with a manicured nail. "The code specifies standard closures only. And that bag." She gestured with disdain. "It looks distressed. We don't do distressed here. We represent excellence." The floor had gone dead silent. Analysts in glass cubicles froze. Junior associates stopped mid-sip of their cold brews. This is where I tell you, if you enjoy watching train wrecks in slow motion, you might want to hit subscribe, because the crash is coming. "Harper," I said, my voice dropping an octave into deadly calm. "I'm meeting with Damian Steel River in 48 hours to finalize a $3 billion acquisition. This blazer is not the issue. The issue is you interrupting my preparation." She flushed a deep red that clashed horribly with her silk scarf. She wasn't used to pushback. She was used to Daddy's authority and terrified interns. "I'm the Vice President's Chief of Staff," she announced, throwing around a title I knew was fabricated for her pay grade. "I'm enforcing standards. If you can't follow basic corporate policy, how can we trust you with the future of this firm?" It was so absurd I almost laughed, but I saw the glint in her eye. She didn't care about buttons. She wanted a scalp. She'd picked me because I looked established, and taking down the queen is the fastest way to terrify the hive. "Go home, change, submit a formal apology to HR for the infraction," she commanded, crossing her arms. I looked at her, really looked. I saw the tremor in her hands, the desperate need for validation, and I saw the complete absence of any understanding of what I actually did. "No," I said simply. "Excuse me? No, I have work to do." I turned back to the window. "You're fired." The words hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. I turned slowly. She was panting slightly, eyes wide. She'd pulled the trigger. "You can't be serious," I said, not pleading, but analyzing. "I am your superior by proxy, and you are insubordinate." Her voice cracked. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out." I glanced at the horrified faces outside the glass. I looked down at the $3 billion deal on my tablet, and then a strange cold clarity washed over me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. Okay. Harper blinked, expecting a fight, begging, negotiations. Okay. You're right, Harper. I snapped my tablet cover shut. Standards are important. I'll pack my things immediately. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past her, my shoulder brushing hers, and headed for my office. She thought she'd just asserted dominance. She had no idea she'd just pulled the pin on a grenade set to detonate in 48 hours. She'd fired the only person on this side of the hemisphere who understood the silent language of the Steel River family. The walk to my office was a study in silent theater. I didn't look back, but I could feel her stare drilling into my spine. Confused by my compliance, unsettled by the hollow victory, my office was a sanctuary of controlled chaos. Unlike the sterile minimalism of the boardroom, my space was a landscape of stacked dossiers, legal pads filled with shorthand only I could decipher, and a single leather-bound Rolodex that was, ironically, the most valuable object in the entire building. Harper probably thought everything lived on the server. She didn't understand that in the world of legacy wealth and high-stakes mergers, the real deals were brokered on the backs of cocktail napkins and sealed with handshakes remembered only by those in the room. I didn't rush. Rushing implies guilt, or at least panic. I had neither. I opened my drawers with the slow, precise movements of a bomb technician. First, the personal items. The framed photo of my mother, who taught me that elegance is a weapon. The obsidian paperweight Damien Steel River gave me after we closed the Singapore deal 3 years ago. Then the Rolodex. I dropped it into my distressed leather satchel. It landed with a heavy, final thud. My assistant, Leo, appeared in the doorway, pale as parchment, twisting a pen in his hands. Ilara, is it true? Did she actually? It's true, Leo, I said, my voice soft but steady. I picked up a stack of files, the preliminary due diligence for the Steel River merger. They were the company copies. Technically, they belonged here. I set them back down in the center of my desk, perfectly aligned. But the merger, Leo stammered. The meeting is in 2 days. No one else knows about the side agreements, the verbal assurances on the family holdings in Vermont. I'm sure Harper is very capable, I said. The lie tasted sweet, like dark honey. She has an MBA, Leo. She's read the handbook. I cleared my browser history, logged out of the encrypted server, wiped the local cache. I wasn't destroying property. I was erasing my intellectual footprint. If they wanted to navigate the labyrinth of this deal, they'd have to do it with the incomplete map they had on file, not the living blueprint in my mind. I slipped on my coat, cashmere, soft against the suddenly frigid blast of the AC. I hoisted my satchel. When I stepped out, the entire floor was performing the quiet pantomime of work. Heads were bowed, but eyes darted. The silence was deafening. The silence of a crew watching their captain being marooned by a mutineer who couldn't read the stars. Harper was waiting by the elevators, arms crossed, flanked by 2 security guards who shifted uncomfortably. They knew me. Frank, the senior guard, had shared coffee with me during countless late nights. Make sure she doesn't take any proprietary data, Harper snapped. Frank met my eyes, his own full of quiet apology. She's clean, Ms. Harper, he mumbled, not even glancing at my bag. Harper scoffed. Fine, just get her out. I want this negativity off my floor. I pressed the elevator button, waited for the chime. When the door slid open, I turned to her. She braced for a curse, a threat, "you'll regret this." Instead, I smiled. A genuine, warm smile, the kind you give someone who has just handed you a winning lottery ticket thinking it's a bill. Thank you, Harper. Her brow furrowed. Confusion cracked her mask of arrogance for a split second. For what? For clarifying the priorities of this organization, I said. It's been illuminating. Good luck with the merger. The Vermont addendums are particularly nuanced. I stepped into the elevator. What addendums? She demanded, stepping forward as the doors began to close. The file is complete. I saw the digital drive. Digital drives are so impersonal, I said softly. The door slid shut, cutting off her face just as the first flicker of panic ignited in her eyes. The descent was a physical release. Gravity pulled at my stomach, but my spirit felt weightless. I checked my watch. 10:47 a.m. By noon, legal would be asking questions. By 2, the partners would be nervous. By tomorrow morning, the hemorrhage would begin. I walked out of the tower and into the sharp, unfiltered sunlight of the city. I didn't call a car. I walked 3 blocks to a small, independent cafe, ordered a double espresso, and sat by the window. I took my phone from my bag and powered it off. Let them sit in the silence I left behind. The afternoon was a study in detachment. I wandered into a modern art museum, losing myself in canvases of chaotic color and form. Abstract expressionism that mirrored the corporate schematics now crumbling in my absence. For the first time in a decade, I noticed the texture of the paint, the weight of the silence. The billion-dollar burden was gone from my shoulders. It wasn't until 6:30 p.m. back in my apartment with a glass of Barolo that I powered my phone on. It erupted. A frantic buzzing hornet's nest of regret, the screen illuminated with a cascade of notifications. A digital avalanche, 22 missed calls from the office. Leo, 7 messages. The head of HR, 4 calls. An unknown number, likely the CFO's private line. 12 calls. 34 new emails. I took a slow sip of wine, savoring the dry complexity, and scrolled through the texts. Leo, 11:53 a.m. Alara, legal just stormed down. They're demanding to know who authorized your termination. Harper is barricaded in her office. Leo, 1:20 p.m. The Steel River team from Tokyo tried to call you directly. Harper took the call. It did not go well. I heard yelling through the door. Something about broken faith. Leo, 3:05 p.m. Where are the Vermont files? Harper is screaming at IT. She says you deleted them. They say they never existed on the server. Everyone is panicking. A slow smile touched my lips. Of course they weren't on the server. The Vermont files weren't documents. They were the unwritten codicils, the gentlemen's agreements. They were the promises made to Damien Steel River about the preservation of his father's legacy workshop, a non-revenue generating parcel of land that was the emotional heart of the entire deal. They lived in the handwritten notes now resting in my fireplace, turned to delicate ash. I opened an email from the General Counsel Martin, a decent man, but spineless when facing the board. Subject: urgent, clarification required. Alara, there appears to be a catastrophic misunderstanding regarding personnel protocol. Your presence is required for immediate reconciliation. Harper is new and may have overstepped. We cannot let a personnel issue derail the Steel River transaction. Call me. Personnel issue. I whispered to the quiet room. They always called it that when a woman was targeted, but strategic restructuring when a man was ousted. I didn't reply. My mind painted the scene at Sterling and Gray perfectly, the sunset casting long, accusing shadows across the open floor plan. Harper's jasmine perfume gone sour, her crisp white blazer wrinkled. The dawning realization that VP's daughter commanded obedience, but not competence. She had the numbers, the valuations, the term sheet. But she didn't have the why. She didn't know that Clause 5.3, the obscure environmental liability waiver, was actually a carefully coded protection for that Vermont land. To her MBA-trained eye, it was a line item to be negotiated away for better margins. To Damien Steel River, it was an insult that would make him walk away before the ink was dry. Another text buzzed through. This one from the unsaved number with the CFO's area code. CFO 7:47 p.m. Ilara, pick up the damn phone, name your price. Name your price. My price wasn't money, my price was respect, and they had just declared it worthless currency. I set the phone face down on the coffee table. I wasn't going to save them, not tonight. Tonight I would watch a film, maybe a thriller, maybe a tragedy. The panic was a distant murmur from here, but I knew by morning it would be a scream. There is a locked drawer in my home office. It doesn't hold jewelry or cash, it holds leverage. I walked to my antique writing desk, retrieved a small brass key from beneath a potted succulent. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside, on a velvet lining, lay a single leather-bound folder. It was worn at the edges, smelling of old paper and cigar smoke. Embossed in faded gold leaf were the words, Steel River Family Trust, Protocol Alpha. Most thought I was hired by Sterling & Gray for my Ivy League pedigree and deal sheet. The truth was, I came as part of a package. 5 years ago, when Damian Steel River first considered allowing outside capital near his family's empire, he had one condition. He wanted a liaison who understood old money. Not the loud, fleeting wealth of tech, but the quiet, generational kind that moves in decades, not quarters. My late mother had been the Steel River family's curator and confidant for years. I grew up in the libraries and gardens of their estate. I wasn't just an employee, I was the bridge. The translator between the cold, algorithmic greed of Sterling & Gray and the feudal, honor-bound world of the Steel River legacy. I opened the binder. Inside was a single ivory card with a handwritten phone number, not a business line, the number to the private satellite phone Damian kept with him at all times. I traced the numbers with my finger. Calling this was the nuclear option. It breached every confidentiality clause I'd ever signed. It was professional suicide. But then I remembered Harper's sneer, the way she looked at my blazer as if it were a contaminant, the triumphant glint as she fired me in front of my team. I picked up my phone. I dialed. It rang twice. Damian Steel River. The voice was a low rumble, weathered and familiar. It's Alara. A pause, a shift in the atmosphere. We're in a quiet period until Friday's signing. We were, I said, my voice steady. The parameters have changed. Changed how? The warmth evaporated, replaced by the chill of a man who commanded tanker fleets. I've been terminated. The silence on the line was absolute, so profound I thought the connection was lost. Terminated, he repeated, the word strange on his tongue. By whom? The board? The SEC? No, I said. By the new vice president's chief of staff for a dress code violation and a misalignment of culture. Another beat of silence. A dress code violation, he stated flatly. Yes, she believes my buttons were non-compliant. And the Vermont transition, the stewardship agreements? Unattended, I said. Harper believes the digital file is sufficient. She's planning to renegotiate Clause 5.3 for efficiency. I heard a sound, a sharp exhale that was either a laugh or a snarl. The digital file lists the Vermont property as a liability. Without your appendix, the models will flag it for divestiture within a fiscal quarter. Correct. So they fired the archivist, Damian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. 2 days before signing away their future? It appears so. Alara, he said, are you free for breakfast tomorrow? Unemployed, Damian. My calendar is remarkably clear. Good. Meet me at the Lanesboro, 8 a.m. and Alara? Yes? Do not sign a single thing they put in front of you. No severance, no NDA, nothing. I wouldn't dream of it. I hung up. My heart thudded a slow, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I had just crossed the Rubicon. I was no longer a dismissed employee. I was a sovereign agent. The Lanesboro served breakfast with a hushed, gilded efficiency that made conspiracy feel like tradition. Damian Steel River was already seated, a portrait of old-world power in a charcoal suit, his silver hair swept back, eyes the color of a winter sea. We didn't discuss the unseasonable warmth or the menu. He buttered a piece of sourdough with surgical precision. My lead counsel received a call from your office yesterday afternoon. I took a sip of Earl Grey. Let me guess. Harper. A woman, yes. She sounded breathless. A flicker of cold amusement crossed his face. She informed him you were unexpectedly hospitalized, a severe case of exhaustion, but that you had fully briefed her on all deal particulars. I set my cup down. The audacity was breathtaking. It wasn't just a lie, it was a tactically stupid one. If I were medically incapacitated, a force majeure clause could delay signing. If I were fired, the key person clause in our agreement, which mandated immediate disclosure of leadership changes, would render the term sheet void. She was trying to bridge the gap with a fiction, buying time to somehow fake her way through. "She's trying to salvage the meeting," I said. "She thinks if she can get you in the room, she can charm or bluff her way past the Vermont issue." "She thinks I'm a fool," Damien corrected, his voice flat. "She thinks I'm a ledger with legs." He dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin. "My assistant did some digging. Your HR department is in a state of civil war. The board wasn't formally notified of your termination until 9 p.m. last night. Your CFO is reportedly redecorating his office with stationery." "That sounds like Richard," I noted. "Here is the situation, Ilara." Damien leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I do not do business with amateurs. I absolutely do not do business with liars. The merger with Sterling and Gray is dead. I am going to kill it." He let the statement hang, then continued. "But I still intend to divest a portion of the legacy holdings, and I still want you to oversee the transition." From his briefcase, he withdrew a document. It wasn't a merger agreement. It was a consultancy contract. "My family's holding company is creating a new position, Director of Legacy Acquisitions and Strategy. The remit is to find a suitable, respectful buyer for the assets I wish to sell. The salary is twice your previous compensation. The equity stake is meaningful. This," he said, sliding the paper toward me, "is your first assignment." I looked at the contract. It wasn't just a job, it was a throne. It was the ultimate strategic repositioning. It was revenge, institutionalized. "There is, however, one condition," Damien added, a shark smile touching his lips, "which is, I have not yet canceled the 9 a.m. meeting at your former office. It is still on the books." "Why?" "Because," he said, the smile fully forming, "I wish to see her face when she tries to explain why her hospitalized key liaison is sitting across the table, working for me." A cold, sharp thrill of anticipation shot through me. "You want me to attend?" "No." He shook his head. "I want you in the lobby. I want you to be the ghost in the machine, the last thing she sees before her professional world evaporates. I'll handle the meeting. You handle the exit." My phone buzzed on the table, an automated alert from Sterling and Gray's server. "Your access credentials have been permanently revoked." A second alert followed, a news push notification from a financial wire. Rumors swirl. Sterling and Gray's flagship merger in peril following unexpected senior exit. The leak had sprung. The vultures were gathering. "I accept," I said, picking up the pen. "Good." Damien nodded. "Now, finish your eggs. Demolishing empires is hungry work." Later, I stood across the street from the Sterling and Gray Tower, shielded by oversized sunglasses. On the 42nd floor, behind the glass, I could see the frantic ballet of panic. Figures pacing, hands gesticulating, phones pressed to ears. It looked like an anthill under a magnifying glass. I checked my personal email. One final desperate message had landed. From Harper, sterling@sterlinggray.com. Subject, please. "Ilara, call me. We can fix this." I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was a stress reaction. My father is asking questions I can't answer. Please. I deleted it without reading it twice. There are no mulligans in the major leagues, Harper. You read the employee handbook. You should have learned to read the room. The morning of the meeting, the sky was the color of a fresh bruise, threatening a storm that mirrored the chaos I knew was brewing inside Sterling and Gray. I sat in a corner booth at the Grind, a sleek coffee shop directly facing the main entrance of the tower. 8:30 a.m. The execution was scheduled for 9. I wasn't alone. Across from me sat James, Damian Steele Rivers' personal aide, a man who looked like he was sculpted from marble and dressed by a Savile Row ghost. Between us lay a neat stack of documents, my signed onboarding papers for Steel River Holdings. "Damian is 5 minutes out," James said, checking a watch that cost more than my car. He was explicit. "You are to be visible." "Visible?" James gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the tower's expansive glass lobby. "To the building." I looked. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view into the corporate aquarium, and there, swimming frantically before the security desk, was a flash of white. Harper. She was a portrait of unraveling control, barking at a receptionist, jabbing a finger toward the elevators. She was trying to stage-manage perfection for Damien's arrival, to pose as the capable gatekeeper. Then she stopped. Her gaze swept the street, a general surveying a calm before the storm. It passed over the coffee shop, then snapped back. She froze. She saw me. More importantly, she saw James. Everyone in the ecosystem knew James. He wasn't an assistant. He was an extension of Damien's will, a harbinger. And he was sitting with me, sharing a laugh, handing me a pen. I saw Harper's face press closer to the glass, her mouth forming a perfect O. She fumbled for her phone, dialing frantically. My own phone, now permanently blocked from her number, remained silent on the table. "She sees us," I said, taking a deliberate sip of my cappuccino. "Excellent," James replied, not turning. "Let her marinate. Panic degrades judgment, and Mr. Steel River has no patience for poor judgment." We watched her crumble in real time. She spun to the receptionist, pointing accusingly at our window, likely screaming about espionage or sabotage. The receptionist just shook her head, terrified. Harper then turned and sprinted for the elevator bank, presumably to rush back to the 42nd floor to sound the alarm. But to whom? Her father? The board? What could she possibly say? "The woman I fired over her blazer buttons is having coffee with the buyer's right hand." It was a confession of catastrophic, irreversible failure. "She's running upstairs," I reported. James nodded, gathering the papers. "She's attempting to control a narrative that has already left the building. In your box, with your Rolodex." He slid the finalized contract toward me. "You are officially signed, Ms. Alara. Welcome to the family. Now your instructions. Wait here for 20 minutes exactly. Then cross the street and enter the lobby. Stand there. Be the ghost at the feast." Just then, a long black Bentley Mulsanne glided to the curb. The driver emerged, opening the rear door. Damien Steel River stepped out. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusted a cufflink, and looked up at the sterling and gray tower not with anticipation, but with the detached assessment of a surveyor valuing a condemned property. He did not glance toward the coffee shop. He walked straight into the lion's den. "Showtime," James murmured. I watched Damien disappear through the revolving doors. I knew the script. Harper would be descending now, breathless, sweat beading under the starch of her white suit, trying to paste the lie back together. She would meet him with fiction. He would meet her with fact. I waited. 5 minutes, 10. A light rain began, streaking the cafe window, blurring the world into a watercolor of gray steel and neon. My reflection in the glass was calm. My blazer, a new one, obsidian black with onyx buttons, was impeccable. My distressed satchel was slung over my shoulder. It was time for my curtain call. The lobby of sterling and gray was a cathedral to cold ambition. 3 stories of veined marble, a minimalist water feature that cost more than a suburban house, and acoustics designed to make a whisper sound like a declaration. I pushed through the revolving doors. The sound of falling water filled the space, a false serenity. The scene before me was a frozen tableau of dread. Damien Steel River stood motionless near the security turnstiles, a statue of impenetrable calm. Facing him was Harper, slightly disheveled. She must have taken the service stairs, flanked by the CFO Richard and the General Counsel Martin. The 2 men looked as though they wished the marble would swallow them whole. I walked slowly across the floor, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic counterpoint to the watery white noise. I stopped 20 feet away, close enough to hear, far enough to remain an observer. "Unforeseen medical complications," Harper was saying, her voice shrill, bouncing off the hard surfaces. "But as I assured your team, Alara briefed me comprehensively. I am fully prepared to proceed with the signing." Damien stared at her. He didn't blink. "In the hospital," he repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the lobby. "Yes, a sudden collapse, but we have everything under control." Harper nodded, a frantic puppet on a string. Damien reached into his inner pocket and slowly withdrew his phone. He tapped the screen once, holding it up as if reading a message. "How curious," he said, his tone conversational. "I just received a text. It says the cappuccino across the street is excellent." Harper froze. The blood drained from her face so completely she looked like a wax figure in a museum of failure. Richard's head snapped up. "What?" the CFO croaked. Damien turned slightly, his gaze scanning the lobby with deliberate leisure until it landed on me. He didn't smile. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Harper turned. She saw me standing there, healthy, composed, my damp coat draped over my arm. The hospitalized invalid, in the flesh. The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. She... Harper stammered, a trembling finger pointing at me. "She's lying. She must have. I fired her." The truth, vomited out in a moment of sheer panic. Richard turned on her, his face purpling. "You did what?" Damien's expression shifted from neutral to one of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You told my legal team she was gravely ill. You lied to me, to my board, and to your own partners. And you fired the project lead 48 hours before closing because..." He let his eyes travel over me, then back to her. "Because of what, precisely?" "Dress code violation." Harper shrieked, cornered, desperate. "Her buttons, her bag, it's in the handbook." Damien laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound, utterly devoid of humor. "You torpedoed a $3 billion deal over buttons." He turned to Richard. "Is this the leadership I'm investing in? Is this the judgment you're selling me?" "Mr. Steel River, please." Richard stepped forward, hands raised in placation. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. Harper is new. We can fix this. We'll reinstate Alara immediately, with a promotion, a bonus." Damien raised a hand, cutting him off. He turned to me. "Alara, are you currently employed by Sterling and Gray?" Every eye in the lobby swung to me. I took one step forward, my voice clear and steady in the cavernous space. "No, Mr. Steel River. My employment was terminated for cause, effective yesterday morning." "Then you," Damien said, turning back to the Sterling and Gray trio, "have no authority to negotiate, none whatsoever." He looked at Harper, who was now trembling, tears of rage and terror welling in her eyes. "There is no one in this building I trust to sign so much as a lunch receipt," Damien stated. He signaled to James, who materialized by the door. "The meeting is canceled. All discussions are concluded." "You can't!" Harper screamed, her voice breaking. "My father will sue. We have a binding term sheet." "Term sheets are predicated on good faith and full disclosure," Damien said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper that carried further than any shout. "You have demonstrated a catastrophic absence of both." He turned on his heel. "Good day." The moment the revolving door swallowed Damien's Steel River, the lobby imploded. It wasn't a sound of noise, but of pressure, a psychological shock wave. Richard, the CFO who had weathered market crashes, turned on Harper with a fury so visceral it distorted his features. "You fired her?" he roared, the acoustics turning his voice into thunder. "Without consulting legal, without board approval, for a goddamn dress code?" "She was insubordinate," Harper cried, shrinking back against the security desk. "I am the chief of staff." "You are a liability wrapped in a nepotism hire," Richard spat, stepping closer. "Do you have any inkling of what you've done? That wasn't a man walking out that door. That was $3 billion. That was our stock price. That was my career." Security guards studied their shoes. Receptionists stared at blank screens. I remained, a silent monument to their miscalculation. Harper's wild, searching eyes finally locked on me. The hatred there was molten, but it was now alloyed with a dawning, horrifying understanding. She had authored her own ruin. "This is your fault," she screamed at me, the last frayed thread of her composure snapping. "You set me up. You planned this." "I planned to wear a blazer," I said, my calm voice slicing through her hysteria. You plan the rest, Harper. Richard spun toward me, his rage momentarily redirected into desperate supplication. Alara, please. Look, the damage is bad, but it's not total. We can call him back. We'll tell him it's fixed. You're reinstated. Senior Vice President, a 50% raise. Stock. Just pick up the phone. Fix this. I looked at Richard. I'd worked for him for a decade. He'd never known my middle name. He'd only ever seen me as a function, a high-yield asset. Now that the asset was walking away, he was finally seeing the person, but only as a tool to be reacquired. I can't do that, Richard. Why not? Name your number. We'll double it. It's not about a number, I said quietly. I reached into my distressed leather satchel, the one Harper so despised, and pulled out a sleek cream-colored envelope. What is that? Richard asked, a new fear in his eyes. My formal acknowledgement of termination, I said. It was a lie. It was my Steel River Holdings welcome letter. You can't rehire me. Why, in God's name not? Because, I said, holding his gaze, I've already accepted a new position. The blood drained from his face. Who? Who could possibly? The client, I said. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered back half a step. You're working for Steel River? As of 8:45 this morning, I'm the Director of Legacy Acquisitions and Strategy. I allowed a faint, cold smile. Which means, Richard, if you ever want to discuss selling off the salvageable parts of what's left here, you'll be negotiating with me. I checked my watch. But not today. Today, I believe I'll go buy a new bag. This one has unfortunate associations. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Richard's voice, strangled and furious, shouting into his phone, calling the CEO, calling counsel, calling for a miracle that would not come. The line was dead. And I had just walked off with the cord. 3 days later, sterling and gray stock had bled out 22%. The financial news channels buzzed with terms like governance crisis and leadership vacuum. The rumor mill churned out specifics: a fired rainmaker, a petulant heiress, a lost deal of the decade. In a final, desperate bid for a lifeline, the board begged Damian Steel River for one last audience. They promised the obstacle had been removed, that clarity had been restored. They groveled for him to return to the table. Damian agreed on one condition: the entire executive team, including the vice president and his daughter, be present to formally apologize. The 42nd floor boardroom felt like a tomb. The air conditioning hummed at full blast, but a collective sweat of fear hung in the air. Harper sat at the far end of the table, diminished, in a nondescript gray dress. Her father, the VP, stared fixedly at the polished wood, refusing to acknowledge her existence. When the doors opened, the room held its breath. Damian entered first, an aura of immutable authority. James followed, a silent sentinel. I entered last. The collective gasp was audible. Harper's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The CEO, a man named Alden, began to rise, a placating smile on his face. Mr. Steel River, we're so grateful you're willing to reconsider. We believe this meeting can serve to reinstate the merger framework under new, more transparent. I'm not here to merge, Damian interrupted, his voice cutting through the platitudes. He took the seat at the head of the table, the power position they had unconsciously left vacant for him. He didn't open a briefcase. He simply folded his hands. I'm here to make an offer, he continued, for your non-core assets and the shell of your partnership division, 30 cents on the dollar of the original valuation. The silence was shattered by Richard's choked sputter. 30 cents? That's predatory. The agreed value was $3 billion. That, Damian said calmly, was the price when you had competent stewardship. That was the price when you had Alara. He gestured toward me without looking. Alara now advises me on the true, unvarnished value of your portfolio. She informs me that without the Vermont transition protocols, which you attempted to renegotiate, the environmental and reputational liability is untenable. She confirms that the Tokyo partners have formally withdrawn their bridge financing, having lost all confidence in your management. She tells me, in short, that the core you're trying to sell is hollow. Every head turned to me. The weight of their stares was a physical thing, a mix of betrayal, hatred, and utter disbelief. They expected loyalty from the asset they had discarded without a second thought. "Alara," Harper whispered, the sound cutting through the quiet. "How could you? You gave this place 15 years. I met her gaze. I felt no anger now, only a distant clinical pity. She was a child who had kicked a hornet's nest and was stunned to be stung. "I did," I said, my voice echoing softly in the tense room. "For 15 years I followed every rule. I played the game on your board, by your handbook, and you decided that a pair of buttons was more important than all of it." Harper's father, Vice President Sterling, finally spoke, his voice a dry rasp. "We can fix this. Alara, come back. We'll terminate Harper's contract today. Her position, her office, her salary. It's all yours. Just tell him to sign the original deal." The offer hung in the air, thick and seductive. Redemption. Vindication. My old kingdom offered back, with the head of my usurper on a platter. I looked at Damien. He raised a single eyebrow, a silent question. "Are you ready to sign?" he seemed to ask, playing his part in their pathetic final act. I let my gaze travel over the CEO's desperate face, over Richard's furious one, and finally, over Harper's broken one. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess player declaring checkmate. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice clear and final. "She fired me." I let the words hang, a simple, unassailable truth that dismantled their last hope. "No deal," Damien said, rising from his seat. "You have the offer, 30 cents on the dollar. You have until 5 p.m. today to accept. Otherwise, we will wait for the inevitable fire sale and acquire what's left for 10. He turned and walked out. James followed. I stood, gathering my things. I didn't look at them again. I didn't say goodbye. The silence I left in my wake was more eloquent than any farewell. As we walked to the private elevator bank, Damien handed me a sealed file folder. "The first target," he said. "A boutique maritime logistics firm. The owner is a friend of my father's. He wants a respectful exit. Your style is required." I took the file. "Thank you, Damien." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped in. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't instinctively check my reflection to ensure every hair, every button was in sanctioned place. I knew they were perfect. The doors closed, sealing us away from the wreckage on the 42nd floor. As we descended, I felt a final deep release, a full exhalation of a breath I hadn't known I was holding. The game wasn't over, but I was no longer a piece on their board. I was a player on my own. The offices of Steel River Holdings were nothing like Sterling and Gray. Tucked in a renovated brick and beam warehouse in the historic district, the space spoke of substance over show. Here, the power wasn't in the height of the ceiling, but in the depth of the relationships charted on the mahogany wall panels. A family tree of global industry stretching back a century. My title was Director of Legacy Acquisitions and Strategy. My mandate, to find harmonious, dignified exits for legacy assets Damien wished to transition, and to identify strategic acquisitions that aligned with the family's long-term ethos. It was patronage and strategy intertwined. The salary was a number that felt abstract, but the equity stake was real, a slice of the very empire I had helped Sterling and Gray try to swallow. My first week was spent in quiet study and deliberate meetings. I lunched with shipyard owners, took tea with fourth-generation textile magnates, and listened. I learned about sons who wanted out, daughters who wanted in, and silent partners seeking a steward, not a strip miner. Meanwhile, the collapse of Sterling and Gray played out in the financial press like a slow-motion obituary. The stock continued its death spiral. A shareholder lawsuit was filed, specifically naming Harper and her father for breach of fiduciary duty and catastrophic mismanagement. The button memo, as the press had dubbed the leaked employee handbook clause, became a symbol of corporate absurdity. I didn't gloat. I was too busy. But a week after the final boardroom meeting, An email landed in my personal inbox. It was from Richard, the CFO. The subject line was simply, "A proposal." I opened it over my morning coffee at my new desk, which overlooked a quiet cobblestone courtyard. "Elara, I will dispense with pleasantries. We are preparing for a Chapter 11 filing. The value destruction is nearly total. Before we hand the keys to the bankruptcy court, there may be a way to salvage a few fragments for shareholders, including the pension fund. The Maritime Logistics Division. It's small, clean, and still has value. I know it's on your target list for Steel River. I am proposing a direct sale, to you. Cut out the courts, the delays, the vulture funds. You know its true worth better than anyone. We can move fast. The terms would be favorable. Consider it." Richard. It was a white flag, a desperate plea to deal with the devil he knew. He was right. The small, efficient logistics division was on my list. It was the one piece of sterling and gray that still operated with the integrity and focus the firm had long ago sold for growth at any cost. I forwarded the email to Damien with a single-line note. "The first fruit is ripe. It's the one we discussed." His reply came minutes later. "Harvest it." I scheduled a meeting with Richard for the next day, not at Sterling and Gray's tower, a place now heavy with ghosts and failure. We met at a neutral club, all dark leather and hushed tones. He looked 10 years older. "Elara," he said, nodding. No false smile. "Richard, your email was clear. Let's be clearer. I'm prepared to make an offer for the Maritime Logistics Division. A fair market offer, based on its standalone value, its client roster, and its unencumbered assets. Fair market value is a sliding scale right now," he said, fatigue etched into his voice. "Not for this division. I know its books, I know its people. I know the captain of the Aurora Star is retiring next year, and his son is ready to step up. That's the value I'm paying for, the human capital, the continuity." He studied me, seeing not the former employee he'd overlooked, but the principal across the table. "And the terms? All cash, swift close, no retention bonuses for the executive team, but full generous packages for every division employee and honored pensions." He let out a slow breath. It was a better deal than any bankruptcy auction would yield, and he knew it. He was saving face, saving a sliver of value for the pensioners, and avoiding a messy court fight. "You win," he said, the words tasting like ash. "This isn't about winning, Richard," I said, closing my folder. "It's about preservation. You had something of value, and you treated it as a line item. I'm buying it to treat it as a legacy. There's a difference." We shook hands, a brief, formal touch. As he left, he paused. For what it's worth, Harper was asked to resign. Her father retired yesterday. The board is being overhauled. I simply nodded. It was the inevitable aftershock. The news held no more emotional weight for me than a distant weather report. The acquisition of the logistics division was my first official act for Steel River Holdings. The announcement was a small note in the business section, but it sent a powerful signal to a certain circle. The bridge between the old world and the new was open for business, and I was its keeper. My phone buzzed as I left the club. It was James. "Damien would like you to join him for dinner at the estate on Friday. There's a gentleman from Switzerland he'd like you to meet. He's looking for a steward for his watchmaking ateliers. He's heard you appreciate intricate mechanisms." I smiled, hailing a cab. "Tell him I'll be there. And James?" "Yes?" "See if he has any vintage port. I have something to celebrate." The game had changed entirely. I was no longer playing defense against petty tyrants. I was building a kingdom of my own design, brick by solid, dignified brick. Dinner at the Steel River estate was an exercise in a different kind of power. It wasn't asserted, it simply existed, woven into the Persian rugs, whispering from the portraits of steamship magnates and railway barons. Damien stood by a fireplace large enough to park a car in, speaking with a slender, white-haired man whose hands moved with a precise, delicate grace even in conversation. "Elara, this is Klaus Reinhardt," Damien said as I approached, His family has been making watches for kings and explorers since before mine was shipping tea. Mr. Reinhardt, I said, offering my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes a piercing blue behind thin spectacles. They held the focused intensity of a man who spent his life assembling tiny, perfect universes. Damien speaks of you as a fellow restorer of value, Klaus said, his English accented with a soft Zurich lilt. Not an extractor, this is a rare quality. I believe value is often hidden in the details, I replied. In the things others overlook because they can't see the mechanism. A slow smile touched his lips. Precisely. Come, let us sit. Over a meal of simple, exquisite food, Klaus laid out his dilemma. His 3 ateliers in Switzerland produced perhaps 200 watches a year, each a masterpiece. His children were brilliant artists and engineers, but they had no interest in the burdens of business. The larger conglomerates had been circling, smelling a prestigious brand to gut and mass produce. I do not wish to see my life's work become a logo on a battery-powered gadget sold in an airport, he said, his voice quiet but fierce. I need a custodian, someone who understands that the value is in the limitation, in the story told by every hand-finished gear. Damien said nothing, just watched me. This was my test. What are you truly selling, Klaus? I asked, setting my fork down. You're not selling timekeeping. A quartz watch does that. You're selling a covenant, a promise of human artistry in an automated world. You're selling heirlooms that haven't been born yet. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Go on. The wrong buyer sees a brand, a distribution channel, a markup. The right buyer, I said, glancing at Damien, sees a legacy to be sheltered. The structure wouldn't be a merger or an acquisition in the traditional sense. It would be a trust, an independent entity, with you and your children as permanent artistic directors. The capital partner, a silent one, provides a fortress, legal protection from predators, financial security for generations, absolute autonomy over production, no board to answer to about quarterly growth. Your ateliers become a living museum, funded by an endowment, not quarterly sales targets. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Klaus stared at me, then turned to Damien. You were right, Damien. She does not think in quarters, she thinks in centuries. Damien nodded, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. I told you she was the translator. We spoke for 2 more hours, sketching ideas on linen napkins, trust structures, artistic vetoes, endowment models. It was the antithesis of everything Sterling and Gray stood for. It was governance as patronage. As Klaus prepared to leave, he took my hand in both of his. You have given me hope, my dear. We will speak again next week with our lawyers. I believe we have found our fortress builder. After he was gone, Damien poured us both a glass of an ancient Armagnac. You see, he said, swirling the amber liquid. This is the real game, not looting, but stewardship, not extracting, but preserving. You turned a corporate assassination into a sovereign appointment. Harper tried to bury you in the petty rules of a dying kingdom. You simply walked out and started building a better one. He raised his glass. To intricate mechanisms. To knowing what's truly worth keeping, I replied, clinking my glass against his. The next morning, back in my office, I received a package, no return address. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a watch, not one of Reinhardt's glittering creations. It was a simple, elegant vintage Patek Philippe. A note accompanied it in Damien's sharp script. For the architect of time. To remind you that some things only grow more valuable with use. D. I fastened it around my wrist. Its weight was comforting, its quiet tick a metronome for this new, deliberate rhythm of my life. My intercom buzzed. It was James. The media requests are piling up. Forbes, the Journal. They want the story of the reverse takeover, the woman who turned a firing into a dynasty. How would you like to proceed? I looked out at the sun-dappled courtyard. The hungry, speculative world was already trying to fit my story into its own narrative. A revenge fantasy, a cautionary tale. Decline them all, James, I said. For now. Tell them. The story isn't finished being written, and the most important chapters aren't for public consumption. The power I was learning wasn't just in building something new, it was in controlling the story. And my story was no longer a subplot in Sterling and Gray's collapse. It was Volume 1. A year passes not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfying click of well-machined parts settling into place. The Reinhardt Trust is established, a masterpiece of legal architecture that secures the ateliers in perpetuity. The story leaks to the niche world of haute horology, and the resultant prestige is worth more than any marketing budget. My desk becomes a crossroads for other legacy holders, a vineyard in Bordeaux, a bespoke saddle maker in Milan, a private archive of aerospace designs. Each finds in me not a banker, but a fellow believer in the cult of preservation. Steel River Holdings grows not as a bloated conglomerate, but as a curated network of timeless value. Sterling and Gray, in its final death throes, is dismembered. The pieces I don't acquire are picked over by vultures. The Button Memo is enshrined in business school case studies as a classic example of catastrophic cultural failure. I am in my office, reviewing the plans for the Maritime Division's first new coastal freighter, a hybrid vessel bearing the name MS Perseverance, when James enters, holding a single thick envelope. "By courier," he says, his tone neutral. "From the Sterling residence. Not from Sterling and Gray, from the residence." I take it. The paper is heavy, cream-colored. Inside is an invitation, engraved, not printed. "Mr. Alden Sterling. Requests the honor of your presence at a dinner in reflection. 8 p.m. The Oak Room. No stated occasion. It's a summons to a wake or a coronation or both. Harper's father, the ousted VP, the man whose silent allowance set the whole tragedy in motion. Damien's advice echoes in my mind. Never fear a front-on attack, fear the quiet invitation. It means they've run out of loud weapons. "Send a reply," I tell James. "The honor is mine. I'll attend." The Oak Room is a fortress of dark wood and older money. Alden Sterling is alone at a corner table, looking like a deposed king in exile. He stands as I approach. "Ilara, thank you for coming." "Alden." We sit. The silence is not hostile, but heavy with unsaid history. He doesn't offer small talk. "I am not here to apologize for my daughter," he begins, his voice gravelly. "Her actions were her own. Her consequences are hers to bear. She is in Geneva, working for a nonprofit. It is a humbler life." I say nothing. He didn't call me here to report on Harper. "I am here to apologize for myself," he continues, meeting my eyes. "I saw you for 15 years. I saw the deals you closed, the fires you put out, the loyalty you inspired, and I saw you as a brilliant, useful instrument. I failed to see the craftsman. I allowed a culture to flourish where a person like Harper could mistake a handbook for wisdom, an authority for power. For that blindness, I am sorry. The apology is direct, unvarnished, and worth more than any boardroom plea. It's the rarest currency of all, clear-eyed accountability." "Thank you, Alden," I say. "I accept your apology." He nods, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders. "There's more. When the firm was dissolved, certain personal assets reverted to me. One is a parcel of land, in Vermont." I feel a jolt, but keep my expression still. The Vermont land, the heart of the failed Steel River merger. "I understand its significance to the Steel River family," he says. "I have no use for it. It is not an asset, it is a responsibility. I wish to donate it in its entirety to a trust that will ensure its preservation in perpetuity. I can think of no one better to structure such an entity than you." He slides a folded map across the table. The boundaries are marked in precise, old-fashioned ink. This is not a business deal. It's a repatriation, a penance. And he is putting the mechanism for that penance entirely in my hands. "Why?" I ask simply. "Because," he says, sighing, "I finally read The Room, and I am trying to learn, very late, the difference between owning something and being worthy of it." I look at the map, then at him. The old lion, humbled, seeking not forgiveness, but a right final action. This is the true end of the Sterling and Gray story, not in a bankruptcy filing, but in this quiet transfer of a sacred trust. I will see it done, I say, taking the map. We finish the meal speaking of neutral things, the weather, the city's changing skyline. When we part at the door, he offers a hand and I take it. You built something beautiful from the wreckage, Alara, he says. Don't let anyone with a handbook tell you otherwise. I walk back to my apartment, the night air cool on my skin. The vintage Patek Philippe ticks softly on my wrist, a companion in the quiet. At home, I spread the Vermont map on my desk beside the model of the MS Perseverance. Two different forms of preservation, one of ecology and memory, the other of industry and livelihood, both under my stewardship. My phone lights up with a calendar alert for tomorrow. 10 a.m., interview candidate for assistant director. A year ago, I was the one being escorted out. Now I am building a team. I power down my computer. The city glitters beyond my windows, indifferent to the small human dramas of gain and loss, revenge and redemption that play out within its glass cliffs. The lesson isn't that you should burn the kingdom that wrongs you. The lesson is that you should build your own, with better foundations, with stronger walls, and with a gate open only to those who understand that the most valuable things are not traded on any exchange. They are the things you are willing to walk away from $1 billion to protect. And sometimes, they are the things that find their way back to you, offered not as a prize, but as a testament